the trip this year was Monday and Tuesday, and when we showed up to work at the Cabana at the crack of noon on Tuesday, one of our writers was in pretty rough shape from a night out the night before. So there's always an allowance for one or two writers to be absolutely incoherent.
Welcome to the How I Met Your Mother podcast for the episode entitled Field Trip. This is the 5th episode of the 7th season and the 141st episode of the series. My name is Alec Lev, and we're coming to you from the offices of How I Met Your Mother here at 20th Century Fox Studios in Los Angeles, California. You can follow us on Twitter at Rhonhemier Podcast, where we will announce upcoming guests and where you can submit your questions and comments. The voice you heard at the top of the show was Jamie Rhonhemier, the writer of this week's episode and our guest this week. Jamie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've just returned from the How I Met Your Mother Writers Retreat in Las Vegas.
That's right.
Two-part question. Do you remember anything that happened, and if so, can you tell us about it?
I don't remember a whole lot. The Vegas trip is great, though. It's a trip that we do every year, and I sort of equate it as sort of the writing staff's Thanksgiving, where it's the one time a year where we set down the work and we go off to Vegas, and we do a little bit of work there, but it's sort of at a cabana at the side of a pool. So we actually are surprisingly productive given the setting. But even better than that, it usually includes a big steak dinner one of the nights. And included in that is a ritual where at the end of dinner, everybody sort of goes around the table and stands up and gives a toast and kind of gives a little speech. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're genuine, sometimes they're both. But it reminds me of Thanksgiving with my family, where you go around the table and say thanks. So with a 24 or a 25 episode season, sometimes by the end it can get to be a grind. So to have that time, it's really great for morale, and it's really great to sort of like remember that, in addition to making a show that we all love, we work with people who we love. So it's pretty cool. And
you say you get some work does get done. Is it mostly the group work of pitching general ideas? Are you actually breaking stories?
It's interesting. Different years, it's sort of been different tasks. Historically, and I joined the show season 2, so I'd say seasons 2, 3, and 4, I think we had one room going that was breaking stories for future episodes, and another room going that would be punching up scripts. And for me personally, my first year on the show, we broke Lucky Penny by the side of a pool. And that was the second episode that I wrote of the show, and one of the ones that I'm still the most proud of. So work does get done. It's sort of evolved, though, so that in the past couple of years, I think we've had both rooms going on stories. And this year, in fact, we broke another story that I think is slated to be the 13th episode of this season. And so it's great because Carter and Craig, in addition to being in Vegas and having a blast, they're sort of isolated from the day-to-day rigmarole of the show, and they're harder to reach. So they've got less distractions, and in some ways, in a perverse way, it actually helps them to like knuckle down and like focus and knock out stories. So, and I also think that there's a tremendous incentive on the staff for us to be productive during those trips so that we can justify going back again the following year.
Most people think of Vegas as a place you go to focus and really knuckle down. And
yeah. We had one writer this year. I think on the trip this year was Monday and Tuesday, and when we showed up to work at the Cabana at the crack of noon on Tuesday, one of our writers was in pretty rough shape from a night out the night before. So there's always an allowance for one or two writers to be absolutely incoherent. But as long as you can sort of pour yourself into the cabana and be there physically, that's the sort of rule.
For anyone with a sort of who looks askance at Hollywood types, when we showed up for work in the cabana,
at the crack of noon,
pretty much nailed it in the coffin. Very cool. Okay, this week's episode is called Field Trip, that you wrote. I do hear that the field trip itself comes from an experience in your life. Can you share that with us?
That's true. So as it turned out, I wrote a draft for an episode in July, and we had sort of based our planning on a schedule that we had from the network in April that said that the Halloween episode would air number 5 this year. So we broke a story for me that was sort of based on that. When we came back to work in August, we discovered that CBS had put out a new schedule and was actually now planning on airing the Halloween episode number 8. So unfortunately for me, my episode was broken so that one of the stories had to air in the number 5 slot because of the character arcs for the season, but the other story was tied to Halloween. So it no longer worked, and so there was sort of a slippery slope at the bottom of which the episode ultimately got thrown out. So there we were, sort of scrambling for what are we going to do? Like, I need to be off writing something, and sort of spent a morning pitching around ideas, but nothing was really sticking. As it turned out, lunchtime that day, I had a friend coming in who was teaching an extension class of students from University of Miami, and I was going to show them around the offices, give them a tour of the lot. So they came in. His name is Michael Lent. They came in, and I showed them around the writer's office, and my plan was to sort of bring them back to the stage and there show them around the stage and have that be an ideal location to sort of speak to them and sort of, answer their questions and stuff. So we get down to the stage, and there's 100 guys putting up sets and painting and working, and it's totally a buzz. We were completely in the way. So I thought, oh God, we can't, this isn't going to work. I'll show them New York Street, and that's where we'll camp out, and that's where I'll answer their questions. So we walk down to the big Fox lot exterior New York Street, and we get down there, and the whole thing is blocked off because they're shooting an episode of Bones. So I'm walking around like I'm leading a group of 30 students and a teacher with no idea where I'm going to take them next, no idea where we're going to sort of set up shop. Ultimately, I sort of, all right, we're going this way, and no idea where we're going. We finally found a spot near the ATM where we sort of camped out, and
does anyone need cash?
Yeah. And so I came back to the room, and I was laughing about it, and it just, something sort of clicked, like, Ted's a teacher. Wait a minute. And Carter and Craig always respond best to stories that are from real life, and this was one where, like, it was just sort of this serendipitous chain of events where suddenly it made sense for Ted. And then also, I think in the back of our heads, maybe we've been looking for a way to bridge the gap between Ted being a professor and Ted being the designer of this building. So the idea that he takes his class on a field trip to the building site sort of felt like just suddenly a natural fit. And from there, we developed a story, and it sort of came together.
Cool. Now, Martin Short is in this episode as well.
That's right.
Now, by the time you were writing, did you know that he was cast in the role?
I did.
How does that affect your writing of the dialogue?
It puts a little pressure on. Like, it's Martin Short. Having him on the show, I thought back through the course of my career to think if there was anybody that I was more sort of enamored by or who was more influential on me, and I couldn't think of anybody. Like, I mean, The Three Amigos it's a movie that I'm almost ashamed to admit, but it's a movie that at one point I put on audio tape so that I could listen to it in the car and on flights, because I just I already know the movie shot for shot, so kind of like a geeky little thing from my past. But like, this guy, he's a legend, and so I think when you're sitting there writing it, it really forces you to bring your A game. And I looked at the episode that introduced him and sort of saw what we had done for his voice, and just tried to sort of build on that. And this one had a lot more real estate for him. So I think it definitely motivated me to bring my A game. And then having him on the set it was hard for me not to gush, and it was really great.
I saw him on the set for a moment. He was sitting. It was between takes. He was sitting on the couch, script in hand. His script was very marked up, and he's just sitting there memorizing his lines. And there's just something like Right, he is just an actor, but he's not just anything.
Right.
But like he is this comic genius, and yet here he is. He still needs to do these things that everyone does.
It's so true. And at one point he came over and said, "Do you think I should do this line like this or like that?" And I was just like, "Whatever you want, Mr. Short." I mean, you just figure that a guy who's that accomplished, just comes in and it's just magic. But yeah, he's working hard as well. Like he's working to be better.
Did you get to a place where you could call him Marty? Was that ever comfortable?
He did. It was like, Mr. Short, no, call me Marty. Marty, are you sure? Like, so yeah, it was pretty cool. And there was a cool moment too where in the episode, there's a moment at the end where his character sort of has a stare down with the evil lawyer from Gruber Pharmaceuticals, and as we shot it, we do a close up of his eyes at one point, sort of zeroing in on her, and it took me back to a very specific scene in The Three Amigos where his character, Little Nettie, has a quick draw shootout with the German guy, and they focus on his eyes, and he sort of does this crazy thing with his eyes, and it took me back to that moment so much that after the take, I went over to him and I said, "Hey, you know what this reminds me of?" And I told him, and he was flattered, maybe a little scared.
So we've got a question from Twitter that is a pretty generic question about the show, but I thought maybe we can cover it at this point in our season. Tweet Miss G asks, what is the episode routine? How long does it take to write, edit, and film? How much improv is there by cast or verbatim? So we did this a little bit on the podcast last year, but hopefully we have some new people listening. Can you just tell us what the process is of making this show in short?
Sure. Typically the writing staff, I think the writing staff this year is 15 or so people. At any given moment, we're divided into two groups. And at any given moment, those different groups could be working on different things. But an episode comes about where one of those groups, maybe it's a room of 6 or 7 people, sort of led by either Carter or Craig, will talk about ideas for episodes. And again, the emphasis is on bringing stories from your own life. And when Carter and Craig sort of respond to one of those, then you'll focus in on it and sort of pitch on it and build on it. And you sort of go through that process of story breaking until you've figured out what are all of the scenes, what are each of the characters doing throughout the course of that episode. That process in Vegas, we were able to go through that process in 2 days, which is almost a land speed record. Typically, it might take a week or two, and it's also Carter and Craig step out of the room to deal with other parts of the show. So, sometimes it can take a week or longer. But ultimately, once we've got the story broken out into scenes and we know what each of the characters is doing, at that point is assigned to an individual writer. And that writer will take all of that information, all of that story, and write it up into a 6 to 8 page document. You'll get notes from Carter and Craig. They'll sort of help you shape it. Then at that point, it's ready to be submitted to CBS and to 20th Century Fox, which is the studio that produces the show. And they each have the right to sort of weigh in, give feedback. They'll tell us if they have another show that's doing something like that, which could affect the story that we're telling. Once we have notes from them, then the individual writer, takes all of that and goes off and over the course of a week or so cobbles together a 50-page draft for a script. Usually 50 pages. Sometimes they're coming in a little bit longer, 55. You'll turn that in to Carter and Craig. They'll read it through. They'll give you notes and feedback. Then you'll have the opportunity to do a second draft. Usually you get about 3 days to do that. You turn that in, and then at that point, it's ready for the writing staff as a whole to sort of to take a crack at it, to do a pass through it. So everybody reads it. You start at page 1 and just go through it, and you fix jokes that aren't funny, you fix story beats that aren't working.
As a group in the room.
That's right. And all of that happens over the course of a couple days, depending on how much work a script needs. A script could come in and it's in great shape and it's really just punching up a couple jokes. But a script could also come in and you take a look at it in the cold light of day and maybe it needs major work. And it's not always a function of the writer. Sometimes just things that seemed like they would work don't when you actually see them in draft form. So at that point, yeah, the staff goes through it top to bottom. When that process is done, it's ready for production. And production is a 5-day process where, on day one, we have a table read where the actors literally just read their parts out loud, and the writing staff is sort of listening and hearing what's working, hearing what's not. After that table read, we'll go through it again, top to bottom. Usually, that's on Mondays. Usually we're here for dinner, so it might be 8 or 9 by the time you're finished. Then on Tuesdays, the actors do a sort of a rudimentary rehearsal, like on stage, sort of walking through the actual blocking of the show. So you start to get a sense of what the episode is actually going to look like for the first time. And again, we're listening to see what's working and what's not. Oftentimes, things that you rewrote last night, some of them work and some of them don't. So after that rehearsal on Tuesdays, we rewrite the script again from scratch. And then on this show, the script is pretty much done at that point. So then we spend Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays shooting it. So that we'll break the script up into thirds and do a third each of those days. And the person who wrote the episode gets to be on stage for the whole time, like I was for Field Trip. And you sort of you can sort of still continue to guide it and shape it. And sometimes what's really cool is sometimes when you're down there actually shooting it, you'll see opportunities for jokes just sort of come out at you. Like, for instance, in the Field Trip episode, there's a moment where after Ted leads the class to his apartment, he's back on the street with no idea where he's going to take them. And we were just sort of looking at the way that it was set up, and this joke just occurred to us. Ted telling the class, if you look on your left, you'll see an excellent example of what we call windows. And it was just this joke that occurred to us while we were down there that seemed like funny for a professor who's fumfering. So, it's cool that this process allows us to sort of keep finding those things. As far as like the actors, it's pretty rare that they'll improvise lines, but it happens. Like I think the best improv line in the history of the show was from Jason, and it was in the episode where Marshall finds out that his father died. At that moment, when Lily breaks the news to him, Marshall says, "I'm not ready for this," and that wasn't in the script. That was just Jason just feeling it in the moment. And I mean, that was just the most powerful line maybe in the history of the show, in my opinion. And that was improv from him. It's rare, but when it happens, it can be tremendously powerful and meaningful to the show.
So you got 5 days of production. Then how long till from that Friday until for post-production,
right,
until it goes on air?
So that's the exact process that I'm going through as of today. Yesterday we finished shooting the episode on Friday of last week. Today is Friday of the following week. Our editor spent Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I should say, doing what's called an assembly cut, which is where she sort of goes through everything and does sort of a rough pieced together version of the show. I had my first opportunity to see that on Wednesday night. And then starting yesterday, I was in there working with her, and Carter joined us as well. So between yesterday and today, he and I will do a full pass through the edit of the show. That'll be submitted to CBS and 20th Century Fox for the weekend. We'll get their notes on Monday. Then we'll spend Monday going through it again, addressing their notes. Getting at, I think probably by the end of the day today, we may still be about a minute long on the cut, which means that we'll get their notes on Monday, and on Monday, in addition to addressing their notes, we'll still have to take out a little bit more time. And it starts to get tough because, you start to have to cut into meat sometimes. You start to have to lose jokes that you love, but I guess that's why we have DVD extras. And then after that, we'll lock the picture. Then there's some color correcting that happens, and also there's still a lot of work to be done with the audio. We may need to do some ADR to get Bob Saget in to do some lines that we've added on the fly for him. And add some post elements. Like, for instance, this week We have Barney doing a slideshow in his office of Ewoks, so we need to finalize those, picking which shots of Ewoks we want to go in the show. It's kind of that's my job some days, is picking. I want this shot of these 4 Ewoks, but not these 4 Ewoks because that Ewok is leaning down, and that's bad. It's just crazy stuff like that. And then this one's on a fast pace because it airs a week from Monday, so that's about as little a cushion as we'll have for an episode. To shoot it one week, edit it the following week, finalize it the week after that, and air it on the Monday following is a very tight schedule. So typically, you know, from shooting it to airing, I would say it's usually closer to a month to 6 weeks.
So for the Star Wars fans out there, are you just lucky that we're on the 20th Century Fox slot, that you're able to use all of the Star Wars stuff? How does that work?
We have our associate producer Reed Watanabe is tasked with clearing everything that we want to use, including the Star Wars, everything Star Wars related. And because this show uses so many Star Wars things, I mean, from the Stormtrooper in Barney's apartment to years and years of references, he's actually developed a relationship with Lucasfilm where anytime we want to use things, he calls over. And they've been tremendously supportive of the show and willing to work with us. Occasionally, they'll say, you know what, we don't want to do this, we don't want to do that. Because they've been so generous with letting us use Star Wars, we're always willing to sort of accommodate, you know, whatever they want. But yeah, I'd say by and large, it's been a very good relationship.
All right, Jamie, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Now, before we sign off, a little note about our Twitter feed. In late September, when this podcast was recorded, the @Himium podcast Twitter feed passed its first 1,000 followers. As promised, we want to acknowledge those fans who helped put us over the 1,000 mark. We've got Zero Production, Chizzy D, Sleepy Search, Brain Cider, J Buford 04, The Real J Let, Rin Min, Andrid CV, Elton, Al Mickelson, Mag Frypie, Dean Rankin, Jamdidid, Shab Shah, a little bit of Nada Rur, Maja Georgioska, Mikan Tangerine, Fashion Clem, they call me LJ, Z1, and The Telling. And a special shout out to Cliff Clifton, our first follower who doesn't work for the show. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this week's podcast. You can follow us on Twitter @Himium Podcast, where we will announce upcoming guests and where you can submit your thoughts and questions. Remember to watch How I Met Your Mother CBS Monday nights and every day in syndication. Check your local listings. Become a friend of the show on Facebook and check out cbs.com to learn more about the show and watch exclusive clips. Follow the show on Twitter @Himium_CBS. Sneak into the writer's room @Himium_writers. Get tweets straight out of the production office @HimiumProd. And commune with Barney @Bros Life. Our sound engineer is Jesse Olsen Milkman. My name is Alec Lev, and thanks for listening.